Hello and welcome to Unacademy. I welcome you all to the Hindu analysis where we're discussing 7 important articles out of the Hindu newspaper. Happy New Year to everybody. But before we begin, a very important announcement that the 12 months and 18 months 60% offer is going to end tomorrow. So please do make sure that you use this opportunity. Use the code IAS English to join our course and be tagged to our team to get mentorship sessions, and even any form of, you can say, grievance redressal can be done through this, you can say, code. You will be attributed to our team. This is important. Please use the IAS English code. Remember, for 12 months, 23499, 18 months, 24999. Over and above that, if you take 18 months, you also get UPSC, what is called as CSE Assure, under which if you take the subscription and you don't clear your 2026 examination with certain conditions, you will get a 12 months extension. So you should look at the conditions which is given in the description box, and everything is explained in the description box. So do have a look. Good morning to all of you. Now, as always, the PPT is going to be available in this Telegram channel, and you can just scan this QR code to join that Telegram channel. Now, let's look at the 7 topics we're going to cover today. Good morning to all of you. The first one is about the legacy of Dr. Manmohan Singh, and it's an interesting one because we had a lot of rhetoric given in the newspapers, but this one actually discusses tangible, you can say, data, impacts of his 1991 and 2004 strategies, monetary policy and fiscal policy. Then we'll have a very interesting discussion about something where with Delhi elections in February, there is a talk for voter IDs to be linked with Aadhaar. But is there any point with regards to this? Then we'll talk about the Panama Treaty. I have an MCQ here. Everybody is going to practice that MCQ with me. And thereafter, we have 4 topics, interesting, important. One related to what we call as an hydrogel. Thereafter, GM crops, genetically modified crops. One which adds to something which we discussed yesterday, which is the concept of school infrastructure, and we'll end with a certain medicine which you and me have or have had more or less throughout your life, somewhere or the other, a standard common flu and common cold medication which is called paracetamol. But there's a lot of alarming data which is coming out of Canada and the US with regards to paracetamol. So we'll discuss these 7 topics, and as always, first 3 are more mains oriented. We'll have mains questions there, and wherever possible, a prelims question. So can we begin our analysis? One of you asked that, for example, text and context. Text and context comes in the Delhi edition and in the international edition. Some of you may be getting regional editions in which the text and context, for example, this one, why has Trump called the Panama Treaty foolish? This is a text and context, you can say, article. This does not come in some editions of the newspaper. That is why we use the Delhi edition or the international edition, because it has all the pages. Some editions, which is the regional editions of the Hindu newspaper, do not have some sections which you may find in Delhi edition. So don't be alarmed. For example, the one which we discussed yesterday with regards to fighter jets was not available in most of the regional editions, only in Delhi and international. Okay. So the first article has value because of 2 reasons. First is it is data driven, and this is how you actually read current affairs, wherein the person who's writing the article also matters. So the person was one of the, you can say, personalities associated with the Planning Commission. He also authored the 11th and the 12th 5-year plan. Now the Niti Aayog has replaced the Planning Commission, and he's also a professor of economics. Now, in this article, when I read it, there are 2 sections to this article. Again, because reading the newspaper is important, and I'm telling you how to read the newspaper because equally important for your preparation. This article has 2 sections. The first one and the second one, A, B. Now the problem is that section 2 and A and B is extremely critical of and in a way too harsh on the subsequent governments which came after 2014. And the problem is he has discounted for a lot of things in the first section, which he isn't in the second part A or part B. So as a UPSC aspirant, how we read is, then we take out what is important for us and use it for the examination. Meaning, sometimes not every line of the article is important. Sometimes only a part of the article is important. Because as a UPSC aspirant, you want to work for the government. The PPT is uploaded in the same day in the Telegram group, which you can see in the beginning. I've given you the QR code. So the government, want to work for the government. You will work for the government of India. So it cannot be that you start to irrationally criticize the government in the answer. What is expected from you is a middle path. Meaning there can be criticism. If they're asking you a critical analysis question, there can be criticism. Both positive and negative can be given. But as an aspiring UPSC aspirant, you cannot just dismiss everything and say that, no, the government after this point did not do anything, or it is a proposition which makes no sense whatsoever. You are at the end of the day aspiring to be part of the system. So cannot be extremely critical of the system. You may have others talking in a different way, but the best marked answers are the ones who have a middle path. You can have a certain conviction, you can have a certain opinion, but you have to take the middle path in the answer. In the conclusion, you can always leave it to the examiner to decide what he wants to, in a way, get out of that answer. So why am I having this discussion? Because this is an important aspect of your preparation, to know what to read and what not to read. Here, part 2A and B is too problematic. Even when I tried to analyze the data vis-a-vis what is the economic survey data, there is a lot of distortion and maybe a lot of, you can say, arbitrary comments passed by the author. However, the first section of the article is important to us. And that is where we will concentrate, and we will take out things which we can use for an answer for LPG reforms and the legacy of Dr. Manmohan Singh. So I hope you understand how am I approaching this article. Remember this point, if it is given in the newspaper, it does not become the holy letter. However, you need to know how to balance an article and use it in the right context. So part 2A and B, as much as there is a lot of data, it may also be true, but it is not contextualized in such a way that can be used in the examination, right? Thank you, Satya. Okay, can we now enter the article once you understand this disclaimer? This is a very important point you have to understand as a UPSC aspirant, which is to be neutral, to have a middle path, to maintain what is called as objectivity, right? Okay. Now, on 26 December, on an unfortunate day itself, which marks the 20 years of what we call as the 2004 tsunami in India, in the evening, we got the tragic news of the death of Dr. Manmohan Singh. And his legacy as a finance minister, as the prime minister, is immeasurable, and that ways you can criticize him, you can say whatever you want to, but whatever we are today, economically, as consumers, as individuals, and in this what we call as New India we talk about, his contribution is immense. So you can critique him, you can talk about his government, UPA 1 and 2, but as the finance minister, he changed the course of India and its history and its, you can say, economy in that regard. But what I'm saying is a rhetorical point. Rhetorical point means I'm qualifying by saying it is immense. There is a lot he contributed. But I cannot, in a way, qualify what I'm saying until unless I do not have data or some form of tangible results which I can show for. Meaning, you can study for 5 hours, and then if you can't solve one question, then there's no tangible outcome of what you studied in 5 hours. So I can say that yes, you sat for 5 hours, you studied for 5 hours, however, there was no output. So therefore, if I say LPG changed India forever, I need to now qualify that statement, and therefore that would be the legacy of Dr. Manmohan Singh. That is why, because he was part of the planning commission, because the author is also, in a way, what we call as a professor of economics, he is able to give us tangible data which we can use in the examination. So this is about the legacy of Dr. Manmohan Singh, and now we finally have some quantifiable data of 1991 reforms for students who are pure beginners in 1991 because of a balance of payment crisis where India was importing more and exporting less, which in turn were leading to the depletion of forex reserves. India was in a proper crisis in 1991 where we did not have more than 30 days worth of dollars, and therefore India needed to reform itself. It was looking for a loan from the IMF, and on certain conditions the IMF gave us what we call as a loan, but the person who was instrumental in changing India forever was Dr. Manmohan Singh, who was the finance minister under the PV Narasimha Rao government, and he introduced what is called as the LPG, which is called liberalization, privatization, globalization. Liberalization of what we call as the industries, the license Raj was removed. Now private sector was allowed to thrive, and private investment into certain industries which were previously not allowed were now opened. Privatization with the PSU share and monopoly over certain commodities was removed. Only in critical sectors it was pushed in. And globalization, where India's economy was opened to what we call as MNCs and global actors, and they basically from a closed mixed economy, or you can even say a leaning towards a properly planned economy with too much emphasis on the PSUs and the control of what we call as PSUs overproduction, we in 1992 transformed into an open economy which allowed FDI flows which were restricted before, and it allows for foreign direct investment FDI and more investment into the Indian stock market, into the Indian sector, and basically the consumerism which we have today, where we have thousands of options in a certain supermarket, is because of Dr. Manmohan Singh, because he allowed the Indian economy. He was criticized. He is also instrumental in what is called as the 123 nuclear agreement because of India's non-signature on the NPT and the NSG, which is non-proliferation treaty, and what we call as the nuclear suppliers group. India was not getting uranium. That is when he was prime minister. But the idea is, as finance minister, he changed the market, economy, manufacturing, and the industries of India. This is basically the gist of LPG. LPG in itself is a very big topic, but LPG basically changed everything. You are a product of LPG, where India's economy is now opened and has now reached to close to 4 trillion economy, GDP, what we call a size, because of him only. Now, I'll be using 2 to 3 terms here. So I'll first qualify those terms. Again, for anybody who's starting their preparation, you should know. I'll be using the word GDP. GDP is calculated in different methods. I'm using the expenditure method, under which the total monetary and market value of finished goods and services within a country's border at a specific period or specific given point of time is called GDP. And GDP, through the investment formula, is consumption, people spending, investment, capital growth, plus government spending, plus export minus import equals gives you GDP. And there's again the concept of nominal and real GDP. Nominal GDP is not adjusted for inflation. Real GDP is adjusted for inflation. But that is a very technical discussion, which I would leave to Shyam sir to discuss rather than me discussing and going into the 3 different formulas. And thereafter, what is GDP at constant prices, GDP at what we call as the real GDP, nominal GDP. But as I said, once you adjust for inflation, it becomes real GDP. Now, what matters to us is when he started reforms in 1991 and when he became the Prime Minister in 2004, and by 2014 his government was out of power, were there any tangible indicators that India grew during this period? Meaning, it's like a mock test. Do you have something to show for your development? Did LPG actually have any visible indicators as side effects or as benefits of opening up the economy? I'm trying to establish the question here for you, which is what are we trying to look for? Because this will matter for a mains answer, because they can ask you what are the tangible indicators which show us that he changed the Indian economy. Now here, the author points out four very major concepts. Let me systematically develop them in front of you. Okay. The first indicator which shows that LPG did change India forever, he talks about savings to GDP ratio. Meaning, what is the percentage or ratio of money being saved as part of people's consumption as a factor of GDP? Meaning, savings to GDP ratio tells you out of the GDP how much is being saved by the people. Because if people will save it, then in turn it will be invested. So first you save and then you invest, either in basic, you can say FDs, or into the market, into mutual funds. It's about, if savings ratio is very low, then it may not translate into good public, what we call as private consumption, which is people will not spend if they don't have anything to save. So savings will translate into what is called as the second indicator he talks about, which is called investment to GDP ratio. To GDP ratio. I'm trying to make it as simplistic as possible. It's not a topic of GS paper 3 per se. We don't have to go into the microeconomic aspects here, but rather what are the macroeconomic indicators related to it. So savings to GDP ratio generally has some form of, you can say cascading effect on investment to GDP ratio, because the more the people will save, the more they will invest. It's a very simple concept. I give you 100 rupees. I give you 100 rupees as your income. If you are able to save 50 rupees, then only you will use that 50 rupees to maybe give it to some person for lending, maybe give it into a FD to get 7% interest, maybe put it into the market and buy a share. If you are not able to save a lot of money which you get, you will not be able to invest. Now, between 1991 till 2003-4, from a savings to GDP ratio of only 7 to 8%, though not calculated in the right proportion also, we have a number which is 23% of savings to GDP ratio was there. Though he's giving it in percentage, but he's talking about a ratio. So the idea was the savings to GDP ratio grew to 23% of the GDP. And at the same given point of time, investment ratio reached to 24%. Again, data doesn't matter here, trend matters. So from a single digit or less than 20%, what we call as investment or saving to GDP ratio, now we were in a very healthy number, not very high, but still 23 to 24%, which is quite important, because this shows you a correlation also. And there is a lot of data which tells us that as soon as we brought in the 1991 reforms, the savings to GDP ratio started to rise, which is a tangible indicator to show that people were now saving more. But correspondingly, if you look at the data from 1992-93 till 2010, the investment ratio was also rising. So basically, if we say that 1991 is our cutoff point till 2014, there is a tangible increase in investment as part of the GDP, and there's a tangible increase in saving as part of people's income, which you can see here. We have data for that. Don't have to again learn the data, but there is an increase. Now what the author argues is, this was the data in 2003-2004. By 2010, this had become 38%, and year on year, when he was the prime minister, this was the phase of him being the finance minister. This was when he had intervened as the finance minister with UPA 1, UPA 2. As prime minister, because of his monetary policy and his fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is how the government spends. Monetary policy is how the government, through the RBI, controls the money supply in the economy. He says that there was as when he was prime minister, 8.5% year-on-year increase in investment, which is quite good. And throughout this period, if we talk about export plus import growth, specifically export growth, there was a 15 to 18% increase. Now, one thing which needs to be taken into consideration is this is also before 2008, between 2004 and 2007, there was a booming world economy and there was a world trend where there was a lot of positive growth. So all economies were growing faster, world economy was growing faster, and that was indicative of how our exports were growing, how our basic investment and savings ratio were growing in that regard. So this is where he says you can see a tangible increase from single digit to 24% to 38%. His policies allowed for people to create more capital, because the more you invest, the more you create capital. The more you create capital, you create the chance for more economic growth, because savings will also be there and there will also be capital formation and assets growth. So he talks about how savings ratio, investment ratio and exports all were booming, first because of his LPG, and then because of his monetary and fiscal policy as he followed between 2004 to 2014. This is where we are trying to understand this in a pure mathematical sense. This is the first point. Does everybody understand this correlation and this data? Because again, data itself is not important. You can say, or can I say, I'll rather ask you this question, can I say that the savings to GDP ratio and investment to GDP ratio grew steadily under Dr. Manmohan Singh, or grew steadily between 1991 to 2014? Can I say this statement? This will be a correct statement, incorrect statement? I'm using the word steadily, not exponential. I'm saying steady growth. Can I say this? This statement is correct. Perfect. That is the point which matters to us. That is the indicator which matters to us. Okay. Now, but is this the only indicator where we can see the real impact of his policies? No. The second point which he argues is that, wait, we are trying to sort that out. Now is it fine? There was a lag. We were able to identify it. Am I fine now? Okay. That happens because of basic server modulation of YouTube. YouTube server modulation in turn leads to little bit of lag. You point it out, I'll stop, we'll figure it out. Don't need to worry. Okay. So the second indicator which he points out is the 2008 crisis. The recessionary trend which came out of the, you can say, real estate market in America, what we call as the fiscal bubble or the financial bubble, which was appreciation, or you can say overvaluing of that market without real organic growth, which in turn led to a cascading effect across the world, because once the New York Stock Exchange fell, it had an impact on Sensex, on the London Stock Exchange, and therefore the whole of the European markets and Asian markets also got, in a way, yes, the subprime crisis, the term to be used. But the idea is there was a trend towards rising unemployment, slowing in the growth, or what we call as the pace of the growth of the GDP was now getting lower and lower. It was decreasing. And when we talk about this crisis, in these moments, when people start to lose their income, people start to lose their jobs, private consumption falls. I hope you understand this point very easily. When people will not have income, they will not create more demand, and when there is very, very low demand, it can in turn push you into a deflationary spiral wherein more people are laid off, less private consumption, then it leads to further laying off, and it creates a certain cycle in which you will start to fall into a trap which is called a recession, and then that could also become a depression. For example, the Great Depression of 1929-32. So the idea was 2008 was a proper crisis. Was a proper crisis, not at the scale of the Great Depression, but was a proper crisis. America saw, and even basic world economies saw, a proper deflationary trend and a regression in their economic growth. Now, in moments of deflationary trends or in recession, public spending matters, meaning it is the only way to arrest this decline is if government spends, creates more jobs. Therefore, the fiscal and monetary policy of the government matters. Fiscal and monetary policy of the government matters. And this is where the author points out, because of Dr. Manmohan Singh being the prime minister at that given point of time, and he very closely watched the fiscal and monetary policy. Again, fiscal policy is how the government spends. Monetary policy is the money control or the money supply in that economy through RBI. He intervened, and between 2009 and 2014, we were able to grow at 7.5%. Further, if I take the whole period between 2004 to 2014, this one decade, I have a 7.8% GDP growth. When the world was growing at 1%, 2%, China was growing at a 3%, 2.5% and 4% GDP growth year on year. We were showing 7.5% to 7.8% growth. On the same platform, in a podcast between me and Shyam sir, we had discussed that the 2008 crisis, other related RBI issues also, but it was managed quite well because he understood, and in that given moment, the whole world listened to what Dr. Manmohan Singh was saying. The Indian economy did show indicators of slowdown, but the way fiscal and monetary policy was managed, we were able to come out with a better growth rate and also were able to rebound quickly. This is where the second tangible impact of Dr. Manmohan Singh comes through, that he was able to manage this moment quite well. First, he took out the Indian economy from the BOP crisis of 1991. And second, he managed the 2008 crisis quite well in order to keep the growth engines running and at a good pace. We have now discussed savings investment. We've discussed his management of 2008. There's one more indicator which matters when we talk about growth, and that is employment. Employment, manufacturing, what we call as the primary, secondary, and the tertiary sector. Primary being agriculture, raw material based, secondary being manufacturing, tertiary being service based economy. Now, do we have indicators to show that he did a good job in this? And here we have even very interesting concepts which come through. Now, first I want to tell you there are two types of jobs, how the Government of India and the NSSO actually looks at it. It is called farm and non-farm, meaning jobs which are directly related to the primary sector, jobs which are related to the secondary and the tertiary sector, but mostly non-farm jobs means secondary sector. Now, India has a very precarious position. When I will teach you world history, and if you've ever studied world history, you would know about a concept called industrial revolution. That Britain was the first country to industrialize, and thereafter you have the cascading effect through Europe, and by 1880s, most of Europe was industrializing. Now, there's a way to define industrial revolution. Now, I'm trying to give you a little bit of backstory. Do understand this point. There's a way to understand the industrial revolution, meaning there's a difference between industrialization and industrial revolution. If I say that India is or was industrializing, that statement is correct. But if I want to say that India went through an industrial revolution, that statement is incorrect. That statement is incorrect because there are two processes processes which together constituted industrial revolution. Now let me qualify what I'm trying to say here. See, when the secondary sector starts to outperform the primary sector and the GDP contribution of the secondary sector is more than the GDP contribution of the primary sector, we believe that a country is industrializing. This is true for India, but in a very skewed way, because when this was happening, still 47 to 48% of our population was in primary sector, and with only 15 to 16% of the population in secondary, the GDP growth was outperforming in the secondary. If this happens, we say that industrialization is happening. We don't say industrial revolution is happening. For industrial revolution to happen, there's a word which is used, which is called structural transformation. Structural transformation is when labor or population starts to proportionally move out of primary sector and go into the secondary sector. This is called structural transformation. Structural transformation of the demographic profile of these two sectors, where basically it's called in very layman terms rural to urban migration, meaning people start to leave the primary sector and start to go into the secondary sector. For example, 2000 and at 2010, for example, let's take an example. This is hypothetical data. If primary, secondary, taking into account that tertiary is not developed properly, you have 2000 and 2010. If I had 1 lakh men here and I had 20,000 men here, 20,000 men here, meaning 1 lakh population was in primary, 20,000 was in secondary. And if I say that there are now 20,000 people here and 1 lakh here, can I say that there has been a structural transformation? Yes or no? I'm trying to check if you understand what I mean by structural transformation. Structural transformation of the demographic profile. Can I say that there has been a structural transformation? Very good, Arpita. Yes. Why? Because there is a corresponding decline of 80,000 men and a corresponding increase of 80,000 men here. So basically 80,000 men moved out of primary into secondary. Now India never went through the structural transformation, meaning farm jobs still constituted, or the population till today also, the population involved in the primary sector was always more and is still more than the people who are employed in the secondary sector. Meaning, though we industrialized, we did not go through structural transformation. Therefore, we did not have an industrial revolution. Now, why does this matter? Or why does this happen in India? And the reason for that is one set of words: single male circular migration between urban and rural. This you would see in your towns, would see in villages. You can see this in metropolitan cities, which is the reason why we have not gone through structural transformation, is because the men rather go for what we call as a shift between these two sectors, but it is the family remains within the primary sector. The man goes to the urban sector. For a certain season, he will work there. And thereafter, once he has got enough savings or enough money, he will come back to the rural sector, work in the agrarian cycle. Maybe in the sowing season, he will sow. In the, you can say, when the harvest, the time between sowing and harvesting, that period he will go to the urban sector. And in the harvesting season, he's back into the agrarian sector. That is why it's called single male, meaning the men only migrate. And that in turn leads to what is called as temporary feminization of agriculture, which is women are now managing the farms. And it is circular because they do not remain in either the rural sector or in the urban sector. This is not something which is post-colonial. This is a problem which we developed during the colonial period itself. It is because of the nature of industrialization which happened after 1850 in India, because of the mills, how they were developing, and the way we, in a way, had labor growth in India. Single male circular migration is a point and is a concept which still today exists. We have disguised unemployment, which is too many people working on the same thing, need 3 people, but 5 people are working. That is called disguised unemployment. That is also there in the rural sector. The idea is structural transformation matters, because structural transformation says or tells you, and that is where India basically transitioned from a primary to a tertiary sector. That is why we are a service-based economy rather than being a secondary sector or a manufacturing economy. The idea is very simple. The idea is that feminization of agriculture means more women working in the agricultural sector, and therefore feminization of agriculture. Now, structural transformation can only be seen in demographic profile. Do we understand what is structural transformation? What is the difference between industrializing and industrial revolution? Something which I discussed the first thing when I discussed industrial revolution in world history. Do we understand these 2 points? Very good. Now, the author points out that it was under Dr. Manmohan Singh's prime ministership that we saw something interesting. He says that non-farm jobs grew by 7.5 million, which is 75 lakh, 7.5 million per annum, meaning 75 lakh jobs were created year on year. And yes, Monu, that is basically the skewed nature of Indian economy. That still a substantial portion of the population is employed in the agriculture sector, though the GDP growth is lower than the secondary and the tertiary sector. Pure, very good. You can basically use that data to argue that. That is basically the lack of structural transformation in the economy. So he says non-farm jobs grew 7.5 million per annum, and in the construction sector, from 2004, where there were 26 million jobs, by 2012, there were 51 million jobs. 51 million jobs. Further, in manufacturing, there was an increase of 8 million jobs from 52 million to 60 million. Again, data doesn't matter, but I'm trying to give you basic understanding. And service-based jobs also saw an increase during this period of 2004 to 2014. Now, why did I have that discussion of structural transformation? Because if you look at this data, for the first time in Indian economic history, there was a corresponding reduction in farm jobs and a corresponding increase in non-farm jobs. This is why this discussion matters. Because of his fiscal, monetary and his basic policies related to the economy, for the first time in Indian economy, we started to see early indications. Did not happen, but a process getting initiated where correspondingly people started to move out of agriculture and started to move into secondary and tertiary sector. This is a very interesting point which he makes, that other than having savings and investment increasing, we also saw 2008 being managed well, but for the first time under him, we saw early indications of structural transformation happening. Structural transformation is a word which is used to indicate the corresponding, which is called relative movement of labor out of agriculture into industries. Meaning 1 lakh people are in agriculture, 80,000 move into the what we call as industry sector, 20,000 are there, and therefore there's a relative increase. The same time farm jobs are going down and non-farm jobs are increasing. It is an indication of the economy now transforming itself in a structural way. That is why the word structural transformation. Ananya, if that makes sense to you. The idea is we saw first indications of this under Dr. Manmohan Singh. Was arrested because of the global headwinds and the problems which India faced thereafter from 2014 onwards, and the crises which came through, and even COVID-19 just pushed everybody back into agriculture, with labor being pushed out of the secondary sector into the primary sector. But the idea is, this is a very interesting point which he makes. Now, the last point in support of his contribution into the economy, it is also believed that between 2004 and 2014, based on the BPL data, which is below poverty line data and poverty indicators, between 2004 and 2011-12, 138 million people were moved out from below the poverty line into a zone where they were seen as being above the poverty line. Now, this is controversial. How will you calculate the poverty line with regards to income or with regards to calorie? That's a separate issue altogether. But people argue that because of Manrega, which was introduced by him, because of Rural Employment Guarantee Act, there was an income increase, expenditure increase, consumption increase in the rural sector, in the people, and people did come out of poverty previously, and therefore his policies and his what we call as structure of creating Manrega allowed people to come out. Now, what to do with this information? That is the million-dollar question here. If you get a question like this, which doesn't name him, it just says the economic reforms of 1991 and the fiscal and monetary policies after 2004. This part is a little bit unlikely because of the political way in which maybe there is a certain way in which the question may be made. But I'm giving you both parts. The economic reforms of 1991 and the fiscal and monetary policies after 2004 had a tangible and lasting impact on the Indian economy. Elucidate means demonstrate. Now, if they ask you about, for example, just the first part, then you talk about the savings and investment ratio and you talk about LPG. If they ask you both parts, then you talk about also structural transformation. You can use this word, the examiner will understand it. Structural transformation and poverty line and the concept of 2008 crisis. If you can manage this question now with some concrete evidence, I would now want to move to the second topic. If we understand, I've taught you a lot of pure economic, what we call as concepts. Structural transformation, something very fundamental to Indian economy, colonial economy, something which we discussed over a long period of time, how the colonial development deindustrialized and thereafter industrialization in India was skewed. But I hope you understand these points. Do I have everybody's permission that we understand this concept? Elucidate means show us, elaborate, demonstrate, elucidate. These are called marker words, important words. Okay, you'll get this PDF in the Telegram channel, which I've given the QR code in the beginning. Okay. Now we move to the second article, very interesting. This is called parlay. Parlay is two people having a conversation. Elaborate, elucidate and demonstrate, same thing. Now, with Delhi elections coming, a lot of punches are being thrown between two political parties. We are not politically motivated. Two political parties talking about people being removed out of the electoral roll, somebody moving to the court saying that there is electoral fraud, and basically the immigrants are being brought in, they are being given voter ID cards, this, that. Lot of political rhetoric is there. That is immaterial to us because they have a vested interest in talking about these things. But this has created a conversation within the administrative sector that should voter ID cards be linked to Aadhaar cards, which in turn would, in a way, dispense and remove all the issues which these political parties are talking about, which is there are two things which can happen to your voting right. Though you have it, your name is not on the electoral roll and therefore you cannot vote. Either that can be a clerical mistake or a human error, or could also be a deliberate way of removing your name just before elections. Both can be done, but that's an integrity, that's an ethics question. That's an ethics question, which is, there are two aspects here. What is the remedy and what is the ethical issue here? Ethical issue here is human integrity and impartiality and objectivity is a question here. Can electoral rolls be manipulated? Yes. Do election commission officers have a role? Yes. And thereafter, both of these personalities are very interesting. I would not have discussed this topic if it was not for the two people who are having this conversation and trying to understand, should voter ID cards be linked to Aadhaar? Now, look at the two personalities who we are talking about. First is former Chief Election Commissioner of India, very, you can say, respected personality and considered to be a reformer in his own right. And thereafter, we have R.S. Sharma, who is former chairman of Telecom Regulatory Authority, but first Director General of UIDAI, which is the authority which manages Aadhaar. So therefore, we have one perspective from the Election Commission and we have one perspective from the UIDAI. So we have two very important experts here. One who understands the election process well, and the other one who understands the concept of UIDAI and how Aadhaar works in that regard. Now, there were multiple questions which were asked by the author of this article to these men, but some of these questions matter to us. Now, what I'll do is I'll discuss the question with you and I'll tell you how they've answered it, and then we'll develop our own understanding from that. Now, the first question which was asked to both of them was, if we link Aadhaar with voter IDs, would it help ensure that only one voter ID is issued to every citizen of this country? So, the question is, if I link voter IDs with Aadhaar, would this automatically lead to duplication errors being removed? It's called double counting, meaning and in India, we do have these cases. There are people who have two voter IDs. They have one in UP and the other one in Karnataka, or they have one from Delhi. They also have it from UP. They have two constituencies they are actually registered, which is basically not something which should not happen, but is happened because it does happen because there is no way the electoral roll officer from, for example, a constituency from UP can check if he or she has been removed from the original, you can say, electoral roll. It may be updated later, but there can be a double incidence here of having two places where you're registered to vote. Happens. Let's be very honest, we have seen it. There are multiple examples maybe in and around you who are holding two voter ID cards from two different states. So that is something which they are arguing, that if we link Aadhaar with voter ID cards, will this stop? Now, this is where S.Y. Qureshi argues that there was a pilot program which the government of India was running under the Election Commission. Basically, the Election Commission was running a pilot program in Goa where biometric authentication of the voter ID cards was being done in Goa on a pilot program. And the idea was every voter ID should be linked to a biometric authentication, for example, your thumbprint, and that would allow for people not to be registered in 2, 3, 4 constituencies. At the same time, he argues that the Aadhaar program was rolled out, and because Aadhaar has two types of data, which is demographic data and biometric data, it captures your name, age, address, father's name, etc., etc. But at the same point of time, it captures your retina scan and it captures your thumbprint. Most of you would have gone through that concept, so you know. So everybody here must have an Aadhaar card, so therefore you know how it happens. Now the idea was, as soon as the government of India started to roll out Aadhaar, the Election Commission stopped this pilot program in Goa because there was an understanding, now pay attention, there was an understanding that Aadhaar would eventually get linked up with the Election Commission voter IDs, and this would in turn lead to a biometric authentication based voter ID system. This is where the inception of UIDI, and when S.Y. Qureshi was there was a lot of conversation between UIDI and the EC on how this authentication and integration should happen. But there's a problem. You may be eligible to have an Aadhaar card, but that automatically does not make you eligible to have a voter IDs card. Meaning, your right to have, or the fact that you have an Aadhaar card, does not automatically give you the right to vote. And this is a point which R.S. Sharma points out, because Aadhaar, now explicitly your Aadhaar card would say it, Aadhaar is not a proof of citizenship. Citizenship is important to have the right to vote after 18 years. Therefore, because Aadhaar cannot be used as a proof of citizenship and date of birth, both these aspects properly being established by the Supreme Court also, I'll tell you the judgment. Therefore, every person who got an Aadhaar card is not necessarily a voter. And therefore, it was the job of the Election Commission of India to make sure that the authentication would happen in such a way that only the people who are allowed to vote would have got Aadhaar authentication. Now, the reason for that is because Aadhaar can be issued to any person residing in the country for more than 6 months continuously, and therefore foreign nationals are eligible to obtain an Aadhaar if they are living in India for more than half a year, meaning more than 6 months, therein a foreign national becomes eligible to have an Aadhaar card. But is the foreign national eligible to vote in India? Tell me, does this, because he holds an Aadhaar card, will he automatically become eligible to vote in India? And the answer to that question is no, because he's not the citizen of India. And therefore, the Supreme Court, in the case, Justice Case Puttaswamy retired versus the Union of India, in 2018, talked about the constitutional validity of Aadhaar, but very well established that Aadhaar number for authentication is not a proof of domicile, is not a proof of citizenship, and is not a proof of date of birth. And this is where S.Y. Qureshi now argues that, as everybody knows that Aadhaar is not proof of citizenship, this can only remove duplication. It cannot stop fraud. It cannot stop human-based removal. It can only stop duplication. This is where he is arguing that the purpose of Aadhaar authentication for voter ID can only be to stop duplication. It cannot remove all other ethical issues related to the concept of voter ID fraud and electoral roll manipulation. Here, they also talked about something called the National Electoral Roll Purification and Authentication Program, where the idea was a lot of people were now missing from the voters list. And S.Y. Qureshi argues that the way you go out of a voter list which you were already a part of could be either you do not want to register even though you are eligible, or either it's a computing error, or it's pure you can say administration, mischief, or something where there's bad intention. Therefore, what he argues is a very, very interesting point, that voter ID authentication with Aadhaar is good to remove duplication, but cannot manage three issues which are there, which is if it's an integrity issue, if it's an issue of impartiality, if it's an issue of objectivity, they will still remain. They will still remain. Meaning, even if we have voter ID Aadhaar card authentication, if somebody wants your name out of the electoral roll, he or she will be able to do it. So now I'll ask you this question, is linking voter IDs with Aadhaar the silver bullet, the one-stop solution for all the issues related to integrity and transparency issues related to voter ID fraud and the concept of voter ID or electoral manipulation? Yes or no? Yes. This is the answer I want from you. When you write the answer in the examination, you say that yes, it removes one of the apprehensions, which is duplication. But it cannot manage the ethical dilemmas and issues related to it. Therein, this becomes an ethics question also related to GS paper 4. If some, and this is where SY Qureshi is very blunt in saying, if a senior wants, if there are orders, and if there is a proper, you can say, intention to remove your name from the Aadhaar card, from the electoral roll, it can be done. Now, why am I having this discussion? Because you can get a question like this, which is the linking of the Aadhaar with voter IDs can solve the issues of election transparency. Comment means it wants your opinion. Now, if you start to say that linking Aadhaar with voter ID cards is going to end all problems in voter electoral transparency, everybody is going to say, yes, the process of elections in India is totally transparent, we have no issues with regards to that, then this answer you're writing is actually wrong. Herein lies the importance of this article, where two experts have told us because Aadhaar is not a proof of citizenship, it has one very big issue, which is with no proof of citizenship, people may have an Aadhaar card but may not be eligible to vote. In this case, it should not happen that at the grassroots level, people who should not have a voter ID card are having voter ID cards. This is the other issue here. And second is, with voter IDs being linked to Aadhaar, one-time authentication can happen. Therein lies the concept of using your authentication. You can stop duplication, but it cannot solve everything. There is also a privacy concern. There are a lot of activists who say that if this is done, privacy will be breached. But this is where both R.S. Sharma and S.Y. Qureshi say that that is a little bit misleading or rhetorical point being made by activists. Why? Because the demographic information which is available on the voter ID card is already available on the electoral roll. Electoral roll is already available on the websites. So therefore, it is not some data which is not already available in the public domain. As it is, your biometric data is kept in a server locally and in a secure, if you want to say it's secure UAIDI server, that is not linked to voter ID. Only one-time authentication may be needed. So when it comes to privacy concerns, it may be a little bit of fear-mongering, but the idea is very simple, which is this is not the only solution. Even the Supreme Court has said, let us not use the Aadhaar card for everything. It can only establish identity. Any other thing, now even your Aadhaar card says not proof of birth. So what is the way forward, Ishwar? First is this may allow for duplication to end. Second is what is called a stakeholder capacity building, meaning the election commission should reach out to the people. It needs to do confidence building exercises, and political rhetorical points should be shut down by the EC by showing to the people that EVMs cannot be hacked, vice versa, and so on and so forth. That VVPAT system has a certain second degree of, you can say, authentication through which you can get to know that whoever you have voted for. So election commission cannot sit in its ivory tower and say everything is fine whilst people talk about allegations which are being pushed to the election commission. It is a confidence building exercise which can remove the ethical issues. When it comes to duplication issues, this can be managed by Aadhaar authentication. I hope that this way forward is neutral enough to not accuse anybody of anything, but also give a very, you can say, informed answer. Authentication means when you put in that OTP, that is authentication, right? Okay. Can I move to the third topic? These two are sorted. Aadhaar, voter, and Dr. Manmohan Singh's tangible legacy. Yes? Okay. Now we have, with Trump coming to power very soon, he is the president-elect of America as of right now. These type of news are going to become very common. So brace yourself for these things. He has recently called the Panama Treaty foolish. Now, for you as an aspirant, three things become important. Where is the Panama Canal? Where is Panama itself? What is the treaty? And why is he calling it foolish? First things first, the Panama Canal is considered to be a very important link between the Atlantic and the Pacific, to be very, very precise, between the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean. Now, Atlantic Ocean and Pacific Ocean are linked through the Panama Canal, which enters from the Libon Bay and exits via the Panama City into Bay of Panama. And it is based on the concept of interlocking locks, because the lake, which actually is considered to be very pivotal in connecting these two, is called the Gatun Lake. The Lake Gatun is considered important, but the problem is the Atlantic Ocean, the Caribbean Sea, is lower to Lake Gatun, and then the Pacific Ocean is also lower, meaning above sea level, below sea level. This lake, Gatun Lake, is above sea level, and therefore no ship can go straight, meaning you can't straight away go like this. You would have to go through a certain series of locks. Now, Panama is a very important city. The history of this Panama Canal is that if you don't have this, you'd have to go around the whole of the South American continent to go from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And more than that, this was built by the Americans, and in 1999 it was given to the Panama country, or the sovereignty of Panama was established, but this was constructed by the Americans. Now, what is the concept of a lock? Lock system is that by using these locks, they basically take the ship to higher levels of the Lake Gatun, which you can see in this video, and thereafter, through a series of locks, they come back. Now, Panama is an artificial canal, 80 kilometers, which connects Atlantic and Pacific, reduces the cost of shipping. More than that, 6% of all maritime trade happens through it. 6%. It's an artificial canal. That is why Panama Canal is an artificial canal based on series of locks. From Atlantic Ocean, you go up to the Lake Gatun, and from there, you go down to the Pacific Ocean. And therefore, it's an architectural marvel, and it's a, you can say, proper investment base, where America actually put in a lot of money to create this. Now, there are two issues which have emerged, which is making Trump basically irritated by how the Panama country called Panama is now dealing with this whole concept. Now, he is arguing that it is foolish. It is foolish. How is this going up? Basically, they fill in water. So they bring in, they transfer the water, increase the level, and then they decrease the water. So it's basically based on the water transfer, which you can see here. The ship will go up and then the ship will go down. They are transferring water from one lock to the other. It's based on lock and key concept, wherein certain sections of the canal can take you up. It's like an elevator for ships. So the US-Panama Treaty is based on the concept of the 1914 agreement, under which the US constructed and controlled this canal. So between 1914, from the First World War till 1999, till the end of the Cold War politics, the US used to control it. Then in 1999, through the Tarritos-Carter Treaty, or treaties, two treaties, in 1999, this canal was given back to Panama. Now, under it, there are two major riders. First is that the Panama country gets control, but second, this has to be neutral, meaning Panama Canal has to be neutral, cannot be controlled by any country or any specific country. All countries are allowed, or vessels of all countries are allowed to cross the Panama Canal, and the US was given the right to defend the neutrality, meaning if any country is trying to control the Panama Canal, the US has the right to defend and also use it in a priority basis for military purposes. So this is where the US interest was. US created this in order to aid its, you can say, supplies to the West during the First World War. Thereafter, in 1999, they gave it to Panama City or Panama. Thereafter, there were two conditions. First, this has to remain neutral for everyone. If somebody is threatening its neutrality, America has the right to defend it. And last but not the least is, if needed, America is the only country which can use it for military purposes. They decide priority passage for military purposes. Now, why is now Trump irritated? Two reasons. And one is very important for India also. First is that the Panama Canal Authority is charging too much. So there was a drought-like situation in Gatun and in the Aadhaar Lake in 2023, which in turn led to the number of ships which could cross Panama Canal to go down, which in turn led to the prices to go up by an exponential transit fees was now being taken. 36% reduction in the slots of ships crossing. Therefore, demand remained the same, but the supply went down, so the prices went up. So therefore, the tariff went up. So first thing which Trump is irritated about is the Panama Canal Authority, the PCA, is taking too much money to use this canal. First. But the second is more problematic, which is not specific to Americans, it's specific to all of us, which is the presence of the Chinese here. Recently, the country called Panama joined the Belt and Road Initiative. And at the mouth of this Panama canal, there is called the Hutchinson Port Authority of the PPC. It's called Hutchinson Ports PPC. It's basically a subsidiary of a Hong Kong-based company. And the Chinese influence and the Chinese presence at the mouth of this canal on the Atlantic side is increasing. This is where Trump is legitimately arguing that we are giving too much leverage to the Chinese and Panama is now misusing the neutrality. And why are we allowing Chinese investments to happen on a neutral sector? And with Panama holding such an important concept and a very important link between two oceans, why is it allowing constructions of one specific country at the mouth, and the addition of Panama into Belt and Road Initiative itself is problematic? Because Belt and Road Initiative is not an innocent initiative. It is an initiative to undercut Indian sovereignty. It is an initiative which already undercuts Indian sovereignty because of the CPEC issue, which is China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which goes through Indian territory without taking Indian permission. And if Panama becomes a point where the Chinese control this trade between the Atlantic and the Pacific, this can be a major security concern. So for once, Trump is actually making sense, wherein Panama's sovereignty, and yes, very good point, how China pushes country into debt traps, which they've done in Kenya, which they've done in Sri Lanka, which they've done in Pakistan. This is not the right trend, and therefore Trump should be upset with Panama, but this has implications for India also, because a lot of trade in this sector, 6%, is also Indian trade. And therefore, the presence of the Chinese, an increasing presence of the Chinese, is an alarming development for India also. This is where UPSC can ask you a question based purely on current affairs, which is the recent concerns of the US in Panama are a matter of concern for India also. Discuss. Now, if you don't know this development, you will never be able to write this answer. This is both a GS paper 2 question based on, or GS paper 3 also, because it's internal security also and international relations also. So the surveillance of the US is something which is already bound by the treaty. The neutrality is already protected by the US. That is a US problem. US already has pushed in a lot of money from 1914 to 1999. Panama never had that money to invest in creating this. But the idea is you also have to understand that the more the Chinese presence and countries such as Panama who hold such important, it's like having the presence of the Chinese on the Suez Canal. These are very important connecting canals across the world. can basically paralyze the global flow of most of these commodities and most of the commodities which we consume today. Now, if you understand this, I want to check if you've picked up a geography fact, because I'm going to push a poll to you. I have a prelims question. If you all are clear with the mains question, I would want to ask you a question related to prelims, pure based on geography of the Panama Canal. Can I ask you that question? Everybody ready? Yes? Okay. Which type of military emergency? That is all, Lalita, kept in what is called as ambiguity, because America decides what is going to be the military emergency. That is where America has an upper hand because it invested quite a lot of money. Okay. The Panama Canal, which connects the Atlantic Ocean and Pacific Ocean, goes via which of the following lakes? Erie, Titicaca, Superior, or Govt? You are now going to see a poll in front of you. Please answer it in that. Yes, this is this, or this connects the Atlantic. Yeah, this is also goes or connects the Atlantic and Pacific via which? This is a question which makes sense right now, but after a certain point you will forget this. In the exam context, it becomes even more problematic, because all of these lakes will start to look the same, and therefore this type of question you should be now ready for, because this sector is in the news and therefore it becomes relevant for your preparation, right? Everybody has to answer. Come on, I want more participation from everyone. Come on. I'm going to wait for everybody to answer this question. I want everybody to answer it. Come on. Still not everybody is giving the answer. A, B, C, D. What is the answer? Fairly easy, simple, straightforward, free question in the examination. 2 marks in your pocket. Okay. We'll end the poll here. So, 81% of you are totally correct. Lake Gatun. Superior is in Canada, Titicaca in Africa, Erie in Australia. Okay. Now let's move to this topic. I hope this is sorted. This whole concept is sorted. What is log, the location and everything is sorted. This is Gatun Lake, which is associated. Just to show you once more. Okay. A very interesting development has happened with regards to oncology, which is related to cancer treatment. Now, cancer is the mutation of certain cells, which in turn leads to what we call as the mutation of a certain cell, which then starts to spread. Now, in most cases, cancer is a location-specific disease, meaning you can have prostate cancer, breast cancer, you can have stomach cancer, you can have liver cancer. It's location-specific. But the problem is that when we try to treat it, it is generic treatment which does not just impact that location, but everything. There are two types of things which are mostly used for cancer treatment. One is called radiation treatment and the other one is called chemotherapy, right? Now, the problem with radiation is, if I have to, for example, do something about my liver cancer, it will radiate this whole sector. And this is where the side effects is that maybe the cancer in this cell is going to be treated, but it will also impact your pancreas, the organs in and around the liver. The same is true for chemotherapy, because chemotherapy is through your blood. It basically destroys everything and anything in its path, and therefore you may get chemo for a specific type of cancer. It is one of the most painful processes of treatment and can lead to what we call as general deterioration of health. So the side effects of radiation treatment and what we call as chemotherapy is extremely bad. This is where a major breakthrough has come, wherein IIT Guwahati and Bose Institute of Kolkata have together developed an hydrogel which is injectable and it is for localized cancer treatment. Very, very, very important development, wherein it can be injected into the spot where you have those cancerous growths, and because it is not general but specific, the side effects are lower. Side effects are much lower. Wherein the hydrogel is water-based, it's a polymer which can hold the cancer medication inside it. It mimics living tissues, but because it is not soluble in your biological fluids, it can be injected to a certain point and then can be opened or can be administered in such a way that it only impacts the tumor cells and not all the cells in and around it. This is a very interesting concept where we have now developed a hydrogel polymer, which is basically like a packet which can go to a certain point. It's like rather than carpet bombing something, we have specific precision bombing. So if I have this tissue where I have problems here, rather than destroying every other cell, we just put the hydrogel here and administer it into this point. This will then only affect the area in and around it, and the need for chemotherapy, the need for radiation treatment or surgery may also be removed. This is where cancerous and healthy cells can be identified well. This could be a game changer. This could be the future of oncology and future of what we today call as cancer treatment in the world. This is significant development. Significant development. So IIT Guwahati should and Bose Institute should be given laurels for what they're doing, but the utmost amount of money and resources should be provided to them so that this can be made available for everyone. And with the pollution, with the nutrition and the dietary habits we have it today, cancer is one of the most dangerous diseases which you can get, and therefore if it can be treated in a better manner without deteriorating your health overall, it could allow for a better treatment cycle, better reintegration of people in that sense, right? Okay. So this is where we have a certain development. You can note of it. Late TT Kaka, as one of you said, yes, Peru and Bolivia, that is fine. That is fine. That is fine. Okay. Now, if you remember yesterday, localized cancer means cancer cells develop in a certain area. That is called localized rather than general localized. Okay. Now, as you remember yesterday, we had a discussion with regards to the UDIS Plus report. I don't know how much you remember, but I'll check if you remember or not. If I say that the enrollment of students in primary and secondary sector has been steadily increasing in India in the past decade, that is an incorrect statement, correct statement? If you were with me yesterday, we had a proper discussion. Incorrect statement, correct statement. Very good. So all of you remember, it's an incorrect statement. We saw there were multiple ups and downs, wherein from 26 crore to 28 crore to a point where which is 24 crore students enrolling with 1 crore decrease. So it has not been steadily or exponentially increasing. It has been going up and down in the past decade or so. Very good. Very good. Extremely proud of all of you. Something which we discussed yesterday, you remember it as your in memory. It has now moved from short-term memory to long-term memory. Very good. Zigzag. Very good, Harsh. Very good. Now, yesterday we discussed enrollment ratios going down and dropout ratios increasing. Can you tell me which is the state which has the biggest dropout ratio? I gave you two acronyms. Two states which have very alarming development with regards to dropout ratios. Again, something which we discussed yesterday. Very good, very good. Bihar and Assam. Bihar and Assam. Karnataka and Rajasthan being the one which are now showing alarming developments. Bihar, Assam already in a problematic zone. Very good, very good. So you should really be proud of yourself because you're remembering data from something which you have not revised. Only as part of this session, you're able to get it and therefore you are now able to remember it. Beautiful, great. Now in that we discussed dropout ratios and we discussed the concept of what we today call as the enrollment ratio. Now today we have an article which further points out to something equally problematic, which is infrastructure in government and you can say private schools. Now under the UDIS report, out of the over 14.71 lakh schools in India, 1.52 lakhs have no functional electricity. It doesn't get better. No functional electricity in close to 1.5 lakh schools. Of this, most of them are government run, and this is where the lack of government school infrastructure is problematic. This is only about electricity. If I move one step further, out of the 14.47 lakh schools, total schools, 14.47 lakh schools have drinking water facilities, but only 14.11 lakh schools have drinking water facility functional, meaning some of them have water facility, but close to 30,000 of these facilities don't work, which again is problematic because out of the total number of 14.71 lakh, there are some schools which do not have drinking water also. Don't have to remember the data. What you have to remember, Shalini, is the issues. One is lack of electricity in a substantial number of schools. Thereafter, there is drinking water facility available, but some are not working also, which is again a very substantial number. In a country where we have extreme summers, we cannot have schools which do not have drinking water. Further, with regards to toilets, of the 14.7 lakh schools, 4.50 lakh schools have toilet facilities, and out of that 4.50 lakh, only 14 lakh have functional toilets, meaning close to 45,000 schools have a toilet but cannot be used. And 67,000 schools operate without functional toilets. Out of them, majority are government schools. And when it comes to disabled friendly, only 3 lakh schools are disabled friendly with ramps. Now, I leave it to you to decide what is the priority of the state and what is the will of the state here. Because let's be very honest, if the government wants, this basic infrastructure can be made, you can say, accessible to people. Disability, water, toilets, electricity. These are 4 basic needs of a school. Schools which operate thousands of students, now tell me, wouldn't there be a dropout ratio? Now do you get it why people are not enrolling and are dropping out from the school at a bigger rate? So, Monu, that may be true, but the idea is basic needs are still not fulfilled. See, I'll be very honest in saying one thing to you, that because you have to write an answer in society, because you have to talk about issues related to education, healthcare. Lack of funds is not the answer, because if we have money for humanitarian, you can say, assistance to countries, if we have money to create infrastructure which may not be critical, then we should have the money to also fund our schools, specifically government schools. Because most of the students and the families in India cannot afford a private school. So your accessibility, it is in a way trying to take away your fundamental rights of 15, 16. If you have a school, government school in and around your locality, which does not have a toilet, does not have an electricity, does not have it is not disabled friendly, and it basically does not even have food, water to drink, then what is the whole point of that school? And why would then children go to that school? So this is a mockery of that. This data is coming from the government of India only, from the Ministry of Education. They can't even say that some random concept or a random report said this. UDIS Plus is actually is released by the Ministry of Education only. So you obviously can't say that the government is not doing something or be it anything, but you have to say that enough is not being done. As an IAS officer, this is your responsibility. This is your responsibility. Teacher to student ratio, accessibility to the what we call as vulnerable sections, to girls. Arpita has a very good point also. This is the whole point. You don't have to blast the government for this data, but at least a concerted effort and a policy intervention should be there. I think that is not something where we're asking for something extraordinary. We are asking for the attention of the government, and if the government wants, it can change this. That is given, because that is the power of the government of India, of a 4 trillion economy, that we can change this prerogative if we want to. So that is where the identification of the issue is equally important as much as its remedy. If we are in denial, it will not happen. Clear? Don't use the data, just use the 4 points: electricity, sanitation, and water, and disability friendly. Right? Okay. Now, last 2 topics, simple, straightforward. Just one major development here, and with regards to paracetamol, because we all consume it. The government of India has recently tweaked the rules for the Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee, GEAC it is called. So there's something called genetically modified crops. The only accepted crop in India is called what we call as BT, cotton. BT cotton is basically a genetically modified species of cotton, which has a certain modification which is done to its DNA or its genetic material in order to make it, you can say, insect proof. So BT brinjal controversy, BT mustard controversy, BT cotton is the only one which is allowed. And the idea is that you take strands out of a certain crop which has resistance to, for example, bollworm, and then add it to the strand of DNA of the plant, in turn creating a plant which is genetically modified by human intervention and is now resistant to a certain insect. So you can increase the productivity, you can increase the, you can say, pest control abilities of a certain plant, you can increase water resistance, you can make it more drought resistance. GM crops that ways have a very big market, yes, in the US, but in India, we've been very wary of it. Even the Supreme Court recently intervened in this concept. Split judgment was given over over GM mustard or BT mustard. The point is, once that judgment came through, the government of India has identified one very interesting thing. The people who are actually on the committee, Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee, they were from the companies which produce genetically modified crops. This is where the government of India has tweaked its rule that Now the people who are involved in the expert panel and the apex committee have to disclose if they have a conflict of interest or not. Meaning that the lion should not have the responsibility to protect the deer. Which is, it cannot be that the GAC has somebody from Monsanto, a company which produces BT cotton, BT mustard and BT brinjal, which in turn leads to conflict of interest because they want it to go through. This is a very timely intervention which has come through, where either you recuse yourself or declare that you have a conflict of interest. You cannot be part of the lobby which is pushing for GM crops at the same point of time being a part of that same committee which approves it. This should have been done previously, but has now been amended into the GEAC Apex Committee, you can say constitution rules, under which it will be constituted. So this is interesting. This will be discussed further. We will have something related to this very soon in the editorial, and we'll be here to discuss it. Last but not the least, recently people have died because of an overdose of paracetamol. Now in India, we eat paracetamol like candy. For anything and everything, you will get Dolo 650, Golo 600, Crocin 650. We all done it. Most probably in and around where you're sitting right now, you would have a paracetamol lying around, because that is considered to be the one, you can say, single solution to every problem which you face. And the problem is that, and this is very alarming, in the US, there has been a recent death in the Liverpool hospital of a woman who had overdosed by paracetamol poisoning. ऐसा भी होता है कुछ. There's something called paracetamol poisoning, wherein you take paracetamol more than your liver can take it. Basically, when you take paracetamol, it produces a toxin. If your liver can properly, you can say, break it down, then it does not become toxic to you. In the US alone, more than 60,000 emergencies annually and 500 deaths. Leave it to an American to misuse something. 500 deaths happen because of paracetamol poisoning. And this is basically because either we call paracetamol safe, and in most of India, we do not have the understanding of what can happen by taking paracetamol. Therefore, this is information for you and your family. The maximum safe dose for an adult is up to 4 grams per day. For children, it is 140 milligrams per kilogram of body. Meaning, if you are in a certain weight category, please don't take 8 paracetamols. That is why your doctor would say, in 8 hours have 1. And I have seen people taking 1 gram of paracetamol thrice in a given day. Headache, cough, cold, paracetamol. The standard dose which is given to you and me as adults would be 650, 600, 500. For a child, it should be 200, 250. Let's be very clear. If you have been, or if you know someone who's taking more than 4 grams of paracetamol in a given day, please tell them that they're poisoning themselves through that concept. Now, there is an underlying concept here also, which is called drug abuse and misuse. Antibiotic, you can say, because we are using too many antibiotics, we are developing what is called as antimicrobial resistance in our body. But paracetamol is one thing which you will find anywhere and everywhere. And maybe you and me are conscious enough to know how many times we use it. But people do take 2 to 3 paracetamols together. How is it possible? Because your liver is not able to properly process it. If there's too much of that toxin, it could in turn lead to your liver shutting down, in turn leading to organ failure, which means death. So, I hope next time when you take a paracetamol, you will remember what I said to you, and at least inform everyone around you that this is a problem. Now, on this note, I'd like to wrap up this session. The concepts we've discussed are quite interesting. Dr. Manmohan Singh's legacy with regards to saving and investment ratios, how he managed 2008, how he therefore also managed to have a certain starter when it comes to structural transformation. We discussed the concept of Aadhaar linkaging with voter IDs. Is it the solution? We discussed the Panama Canal, Gatun Lake, the concept of how Trump is getting irritated, Chinese presence. And over and above that, we were also able to understand how there's a new way of what we call as cancer treatment being developed by IIT Guwahati and Bose Institute at Calcutta. And we were also able to identify that paracetamol is not that innocent as much as you think it is. And when it comes to the education sector, my only urge is that when you will become an IAS officer, and if you get an opportunity to do something for the schools, let's try to be as a generation, try to change this data. It's very easy for me to criticize. It is very, very easy for me to say all this, you did say this, you did say that. But if you get an opportunity, if you have the opportunity to change this data, please do use it. On this note, I'll take leave from you. Thank you so much. I will see you soon with another set of issues. Take care and bye-bye.